fantastic. Whatever that means. The main thing is that we are together. We are together live today, and we've finally come to a giant of Yiddish literature, who I actually have met and spoken with. Someone in our lifetimes, but he would not have been who he was if not for the two that we've already spoken about, which was Peretz and Shalom Aleichem. So Peretz, of course, and Shalom Aleichem both were champions of creating a modern Yiddish literature, a literature that was equivalent or better than any other world-class literature, like Russian and Polish and English and French. So that was their goal, and they did succeed. And of course, Peretz brought back the importance of dipping into the tradition, into the world of folklore and the world of Jewish mysticism. So Peretz brought that forward into modern times, into modern Yiddish literature. And Shalom Aleichem, we know, is credited with the humor accompanying the pathos, his ability to describe ordinary Jews living in towns, living in cities, living in villages, and to make them sympathetic to us and endearing in so many ways. So Shalom Aleichem had that great gift, and so we come to Isaac Bashevis Singer, and he, of course, has a distinction of among any of the other Yiddish writers that we can talk about. He has a distinction of having won the Nobel Prize. So what I would like to do is to start my little introduction to Bashevis Singer with a clip from that Nobel Award. And so I hope you bear with me, because the quality of this is not so great. It's a YouTube upload of a documentary, which is, which included portions of the taping of the Nobel ceremony. But I think it's still good enough for us to watch and derive something from. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to share my screen with you. A minute. Okay. And oops, wait, hang on a minute. What I have to do, there's something important in the sharing that I have to do. 1 second. There it is. Okay. It happened anyway. That's great. All right. So can everyone see this blurry image? But you can see it, yes? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. Here we go.
Dear Mr. Singer, maestro and magician, it's my task and my pleasure, my very great pleasure, to convey to you the heart congratulations from the Swedish Academy and to ask you to receive the Nobel Prize in Literature 1978 from the hands of His Majesty the King.
Nobel Prize Laureat in Literatur für 1978, Isaac Bashevis Singer.
His Majesty, ladies and gentlemen, people are asking me often, why do you write in a dying language? And I want to explain it in a few words. Firstly, I like to write ghost stories, and nothing fits a ghost better than a dying language. The deader the language, the more alive is the ghost. Ghosts love Yiddish, they all speak it. Secondly, I believe in resurrection. I'm sure that the Messiah will soon come and millions of Yiddish-speaking corpses will rise from their graves one day. And their first question will be, is there any new Yiddish book to read?
All right, that's all I wanted to show you of that. Hold on a minute, and we're here. So, can you guys see this now? This slide of Singer? Yes. Okay. So I don't know how many of you were aware of those opening remarks of his Nobel, Prize speech, but it's very famous, of course, in the Yiddish world, and I think it speaks a lot to what we know of Singer, at least in a stereotypical way. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into what he was all about. But for sure, he was a champion of Yiddish. He continued the tradition of writing a modern Yiddish literature, even though he was adept at English. And in fact, one of the reasons why he was able to garner the prize, many believe, is because he had diligently worked at making sure that many of his works were available in English translation. And he worked side by side with his translators. So his English was that good. Still, he continued to write in Yiddish. He also could have written in Hebrew, which is where he started off, like so many Yiddish writers starting off writing in Hebrew. And of course, he could have written in Polish, but this is what he chose, Yiddish, as his means of expressing himself. So we saw this, and so this is a little bit of background, a little chronology about Isaac Singer. He was born in Poland in a shtetl, a market town called Leonstein, and within a few years, his family moved to Warsaw, where his father was actually like a state-appointed rabbi who had a court, his own court, meaning not a court like a Hasidic court, although he was a Hasid, but a court in the sense of being able to adjudicate matters of importance within the Jewish community. In 1917, however, he moved for a while with his younger siblings to Bilgoraj in Poland. And he stayed there and he worked there for a while until he moved to Warsaw in 1923. He moved back there, and that's really where his literary career began. So he did start writing in Hebrew, but his main, bread and butter was working as a proofreader for the Yiddish journal called Literarische Blätter, which of course Shalom Aleichem had started. And he was, much of his early success and entree was due to his older brother, I.J., who already was an established writer in the Yiddish world, in the Jewish world. And it was really his brother who had gotten him this job in Literarische Blätter. In 1929, this is a notable thing. He had already met and not married, but conceived a son with Runia Ponch, and this was his son Zamir. A very interesting story about him, which we won't go into very much at all today. But this is when he was born in 1929, and Singer hardly had anything to do with him until much later in life. In his literary career, though, really took off in 1932 when he published a Yiddish story called The Jew from Babylon, and then his first novel, which was called Satan in Gore, in 1933, which is all about the early, the Shabtai Tzvi, the Messianic movement that was kind of a debacle, if you know much about it, in Jewish history. But he, the kind of mass hysteria and the pogroms and everything, very dramatic story. In 1935, already seeing the way the wind was blowing in Europe, the rise of the Nazi power, the Nazi party to power, he immigrated to the US. In 1940, not that long after he arrived, he married the woman who became his wife for the rest of his life, and this was Alma Wasserman. This is an image of Alma in the 1960s. And he worked in the 1940s, he began to work for the Yiddish Vorwärts, which he continued to do pretty much the rest of his life. He wrote articles under many pseudonyms. Everything from political commentary to literary commentary to stories, serialized novels, everything got into the Vorwärts, and he relied on that weekly check from the Yiddish Vorwärts. Unfortunately, in 1944, his beloved older brother and helper, Israel Joshua Singer, I.J. Singer, who was, he's considered an amazing writer, and in fact, Singer himself, Bashevis himself, would say that his writing didn't equal I.J. Singer's writing, and that really it was his older brother who should have gotten the Nobel Prize and not he himself. That's, of course, up for discussion. But in 1945 and 44, unfortunately, he died. And so Singer was, without that pillar of support in his life. But in 1945, he published a novel in Yiddish, which then was translated into English in 1950. And this was a chronicle called The Family Moshkat, which people have compared to the writings of Tolstoy and other great Russian writers. I mean, it's of that caliber. And very notably, and some of you may be aware of this, his story Gimple the Fool, which, by the way, is very similar and probably not without not coincidental, similar to the story we read of Peretz's, which is Bunch of Schweig. So here is Singer's take on this, which was Gimple the Fool, and it was translated by Saul Bellow. It appeared in the Partisan Review, as well as in this new anthology at that time, Treasury of Yiddish Stories by Irving Howe. You may or may not know that it turns out that Singer wasn't very happy with Bellow's translation. He softened some of the edges in the Yiddish, which maybe would have offended an English-speaking and especially American reader. He softened that, and Singer wasn't all that happy with the result. I think this is why he then himself took to being very much involved and close at hand with any subsequent translations. In So Gimpel the Fool and Other Stories in English was his own collection, was published in 1957, followed by a novel, The Magician of Lublin, in 1960. And for the next 20 years or so, he published, prolific writer of novels, stories, children's stories in both Yiddish and in English. And of course, as we saw in 78, he won the Nobel Prize in Literature. For me, as a young woman still in New York, that was a big moment, that a Yiddish writer would get the Nobel Prize. I mean, it just brought a tremendous amount of pride and satisfaction that this had occurred. Unfortunately, in 1987 was the onset of dementia for Singer, which is hard to believe, given how active his brain was his entire life. But it happened in 1987, and in 1991, he died in Surfside, Florida, where he'd been living for probably the previous 2 decades. This is just an image of his grave. He was buried not in Florida, but in Paramus, New Jersey, of all places. And what it says on top in Yiddish, interesting, they did this in Yiddish calligraphy, in Yiddish script, and not in printed Yiddish. But the translation of what is on top, which says Meister von Jiddischer Prose, Kenner of der Neshome, it's translated as the master of Yiddish prose, savant, or knower of the soul. So what's so great? You may wonder, what's so great about I.B. Singer? Well, I've tried to summarize a little bit about what I think made him great. He depicted a Jewish world in all its complexities before and after it had vanished. He was incredibly prolific, as we mentioned before, as a novelist, as a short story writer, as a journalist, as a mystic, and even as a pulp fiction writer. And he was, of course, the first Yiddish author to be so widely translated into English. I have a few quotations from the nobelprize.org, kind of clarifying a little bit about why they awarded him the prize. Well, here are a couple of quotes from that. It says, Singer's range extends from the saintly to the demoniacal, from quiet contemplation and sublimity to ruthless obsession and infernal confusion or destruction. And I would just crystallize that by saying that he just had this compassionate insight and ability to explore and illuminate the human psyche in all of its guises. And his themes often focused on the tyranny of the passions, the power and fickle inventiveness of obsession, the grotesque wealth of variation, and the destructive, but also inflaming and paradoxically creative potential of the emotions. Isn't that a mouthful? But it really does, it does capture a lot of what made Singer so unique. And one last quote from them is that many of his characters step with unquestioned authority into the pantheon of literature, where the eternal companions and mythical figures live, tragic and grotesque, comic and touching, weird and wonderful people of dream and torment, baseness and grandeur. So I'm going to share with you one other thing, which is just so you can see, 1 second. Let me just get it up there. Okay. Back to you guys. Where are you? Oh. Okay. There we go. Okay. So there's actually a not so surprisingly these days, but there is a website, an official website devoted to Isaac Bashevis Singer. Although of course I got my information from many sources, but this is a good one to know if you want to explore a little further. And look at this. This is just his works in English. Look at this wonderful lineup of books in English. You know, I mean, just look at that. I mean, that's quite something, quite something. And of course, the last one was Shadows on the Hudson, which was a novel like Enemies, a love story, which dealt with Holocaust survivors in New York. And this one was published posthumously, Shadows on the Hudson. And let's just go to one other. Hold on a minute, sorry. I just have to find this. I'm going to go away from that and go here. Okay. So this is also some of the films that were made from his work. So I mentioned Enemies, a love story, which was, I think, the best adaptation of a novel into a film that I have ever seen in my life. It was incredibly faithful to the original, and which is a really remarkable book. And we'll see if in a moment when I can see you all, if any of you have actually had a chance to read that book or see this film. If not, I really urge you to do that. Would you like to see the trailer? It's just a couple of minutes. Do you want to see what that is? Yes? Okay, so let's have a quick look at this.
Paul Mazursky, the director of An Unmarried Woman and Down and Out in Beverly Hills, now brings to the screen a story from Nobel Prize-winning author Isaac Bashevis Singer. It is 1949. The nightmare of Nazi Germany is over, and Herman Broder has come to New York City to begin a new life.
This is America. Huh?
Mm-hmm. Married to the woman who saved his life during the war.
Will you have a child?
God wills it. We'll have one.
But in love with another woman, he can't live without.
All year you promised to take me
I
to
still
the
a promise.
and the
I
last
will.
minute you changed your mind!
What are you hitting me for?
I'll go myself.
Until the woman they said was dead turns up in New York.
Your wife has returned.
Very much alive.
Herman, once and for all, how many wives do you have?
I'm not
She's
dead.
not dead.
I'm not alive and I'm not dead. The truth is, I have no claim on him. He probably always loved you. I'm sure he slept with you before me. I came to him a virgin. Oh, congratulations. Men love virgins.
Tony Award winner Ron Silver is Herman.
I'm marrying again.
A third wife?
I'm crazy, that's the truth.
Were you always like this? Or did the war do it?
In her American film debut, Margaret Sophie Stein is Jadwiga.
It's wonderful.
From the unbearable lightness of being, Lena Olin is Masha.
I told you yes! Yes! Yes!
And Academy Award winner Angelica Houston is Tamara.
They put nylon stockings on me. They dyed my hair. They polished my fingernails. God help me. I'm dead.
I can't live without Masha.
She's not your lover. She's your enemy.
Morgan Creek proudly presents a Paul Mazursky film, Enemies, a Love Story.
How do you manage it? Do you rush from one to the other?
I do the best I can. It's not so easy.
So, right, you can you can see what that's about. It's actually a wonderful trailer. It does give you a sense of what it's about. And then, of course, there was Yentl, Barbara Streisand vehicle, which, by the way, Singer absolutely hated. The finished product. And then there was The Magician of Lublin. One of his novels was also turned into a film. I've never seen that one. And then, of course, a number of documentaries about him. So I'm just going to go back quickly to finish up this little bit of the presentation. And so there was the works made into films. We just looked at that, and then some quotations from Singer. And this is him again with his wife Alma in the 70s. Every human character appears only once in the history of human beings, and so does every event of love. If you keep on saying things are going to be bad, you have a good chance of being a prophet. And then when I was a little boy, they called me a liar. Now that I'm grown up, they call me a writer. And then this is something wonderful, I think he said about the Jewish community, really. He said, the truth is that what the great religions preached, the Yiddish-speaking people of the ghettos practiced day in and day out. They were the people of the book in the truest sense of the word. They knew of no greater joy than the study of man and human relations, which they called Torah, Talmud, Musar, and Kabbalah. And then this very last one, which is, I did not become a vegetarian for my health. I did it for the health of the chickens. Okay, so I'm back to you guys. So that's a little bit about Bashevis, as he liked to call himself. That was his mother's maiden name. And one thing I didn't mention, which probably added to the contradictions in his own soul, is that his father was a Hasidic rabbi, right? Came from a Hasidic origins, and his mother also came from rabbis, but from misnagdim, meaning those that are opposed to Hasidism. I don't know how those two ever got married, but they did. And so, there was always this. His mother was very strong. In fact, if you had a chance to read this wonderful opening chapter of his memoir, In My Father's Court, you can see that she figures strongly in this memoir as well. Right? She's a strong character, and in other parts of this memoir, she basically setting his father straight. Doing away with superstitious stuff and showing him the practical, rational side of things. So that was Singer. He had both going for him. So yeah. So any questions about anything so far? Did any of you have a chance to? Had you had a chance to see Enemies? Did anyone see that film?
No, I didn't see it.
So Mara did. Anyone else? Anyone else see it? No? Well, you can see it's got extraordinary actors in it, right? A really amazing cast. And Paul Mazursky was a fantastic director. And in fact, he subsequently wound up taking Yiddish classes at Worker Circle here in LA with my just recently departed colleague, Yaakov Bazno. So it's an amazing film. It's an amazing novel. You want to hate and love all the characters, at the same time, and somehow it works. Yes, Gail.
Am I unmuted? Hold on.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay. So unfortunately, I didn't get to read this, but I have read other things in my lifetime. And somehow in my head, which I don't know, you can comment on, please, because you're the expert, I have him as a womanizer, kind of a sexy writer. He brings in a lot of that kind of things into his writing. So do you have any comments on that? That's just in my head. I don't know if it's reality or not.
Okay. Well, no, there is some reality to that. So Singer was known as a womanizer, I guess, for want of a better word, a ladies' man. I don't know what what's the right term these days, but he definitely was a flirt. With how much she actually came on to women, I don't know. He to the extent that if you read some of his novels like Shosha and even Enemies, and it's like with Woody Allen films, you think the character that's being played is so close to the author, that it's got to be real. Yeah, but of course, so in those books, if there's someone who's got red hair, which is what the main character has red hair, he's kind of nebbishy, brilliant, a little bit like Singer himself, and of course he's got at least three women, that he's juggling. And in Enemies, it's not any different, right? There's three women that he's doing this with. How much, I mean, there are different accounts of how much of that is true, how much he actually succeeded, in his flirting. But he definitely flirted. There's no question. Yeah, but I don't want to go beyond that because I don't know for sure. I know that one of his translators wrote a memoir about her time with Singer. And I'm not sure if it indicates that she had a full-blown affair with him or not. I don't know. Yeah. But in terms of the sexual part, that was the other part that you were asking about. So he definitely does not shy away from that aspect of human behavior at all. But that doesn't mean that he's graphic in his descriptions. He's not writing pornography. That doesn't mean he never wrote pornography. He actually did and published it under another name. But the novels that we know, the stories that we know, are not for pornography. But definitely, there's sexual tension. There are definitely liaisons, from in all directions. And he did not shy away from that. And he was, of course, the Jewish community. And his greatest critics weren't happy with that, weren't happy that he depicted that aspect of life and so flagrantly, right? So flagrantly, he did not shy away from it at all. So I guess I can say that much about it. Yeah. Mara, you had a question, and then Susan.
My difficulty with Singer has always been that I find him rather misogynist. And I think to some extent the story that you sent us also reflects that. I was wondering what the critics have had to say about that.
I think there definitely is that aspect to him, but I mean, mostly he writes from the male point of view. That's not to say that he's not also the ubiquitous narrator who's also writing from the woman's point of view as well. But it is clearly the greatest sympathy lies with the men, and so it feels like women are getting short shrift, especially as you've got this like Enemies is a perfect example, right? Where he's carrying on with at least two women and sort of three women, with his wife coming back from the dead, and he's unable to tell the truth, right? He's unable to extricate himself from it. But if you read the book, especially if you watch the film, you can kind of understand. You can kind of, get why that happens. Even though it's a weakness, it's not a fatal flaw. You can understand and have sympathy for him. So so the women in this case, I mean, especially the character of what's her name, plays the Swedish actress, his mistress really, Lena Olin, is painted with tremendous sympathy, Mara, if you symphony too, but sympathy. If it's worth reading that and understanding that. So, but I if you had to grade him on the misogyny scale, I mean, he definitely would be in the direction of misogyny, no question. Even though he also wrote sympathetically about women, but yes, the guys, it was always about the guys and their needs. Yeah. Yes, Susan, you had a question, and then I think Anne.
You had mentioned his only son, something like
yes, Samir.
Yes, what happened to him?
Well, according to, I mean, there are different sides of the story, right? There's Amir's side, there's Singer's side. I mean, Singer was not married to his mother. He had a relationship with her. Who knows? We don't know for sure whether she was trying to coerce him into marriage by getting pregnant. We don't know, right? But he didn't have much to do with him at all until much later. I guess I can't remember the circumstances, but he writes about it. Zamir writes about it in the New Yorker, and he also wrote a memoir about his father as well, about his relationship with his father. And so when he finally gets together with his father in Israel, Zamir grew up in Israel. Singer pays him some attention, but most of the time that he's in the country, he's writing. He's hardly paying attention to his son at all. He's just he's got to keep writing every day, and many hours a day. And of course, this is a little bit odd, to finally encounter your one and only son and to not be able to relate to him. So it was a troublesome relationship, but in the end, I think Zamir forgave him, and they had a decent relationship for the end. Yeah. And
I understand and appreciate the perspective that you shared, Mara, about your sense of the misogyny in him, but I looked at it differently. I kind of looked at it as a sort of lovely way to picture a time, and I didn't view it as anything more than that. I mean, that the wife as a footstool line was, when they meet in heaven and the wife chooses to be the footstool at the end. I mean, I just kind of found it to be, it just made me laugh. I mean, I think sometimes I worry about myself when I sort of impose my today's sense on yesterday's literature. And I believe that the beauty of this for me was to look at the responsa comments and to look at the descriptions of the town or the descriptions of the old woman, and to kind of imagine the villages. I sort of conjure up my great grandmother when I read these stories. But I wondered, Miri, so I get it, but I also feel the other way. Miri, I'm also wondering, because there are so many translators that he worked with.
Right.
When you think about,
I don't know if so many, but I don't know. Several. Yeah, several.
When you
And
think
all
about-
women, right after Saul Bellow, right, all women, yeah.
Yeah.
Then I forgive him.
There you go. So, and I love his humor, you know, I love what comes out in all of this, but I wonder who you think best captures his sense of really interpretation of his work. Like if you were to say to me, Anne, I want you to read this one collection because this is really, really the best translator I've read, who would it be?
Well, I haven't made the comparison, so I can't really speak to that directly, but I can simply remind you that he was involved in all of the translations. So the way they came out is the way he wanted them to be. So I think you can be comfortable in selecting any of them, you know, knowing that it has his imprimatur on it. Except for Saul Bellows, Gimple the Fool. You know, the other ones met his approval, and not only his approval, his involvement, like some, you know, word choice, and so forth. So I think you know, and when you know, I recently reread Enemies: A Love Story. I had read it, my God, you know, I think when it first came out in English. And I thought it was amazing then, and I was so much younger. And what did I understand, you know, in those days? So rereading it was interesting. It was interesting. I had a whole different, you know, perspective and greater compassion for characters, and you know, all of that. But when I was reading it, I was trying to imagine it in Yiddish. You know, what it would have, and I felt that the language was very close to what he would have been saying in Yiddish as well. You know, it wasn't trying to anglicize words of the characters or even the philosophical thoughts, and that's the other thing. So this novel is sprinkled with philosophy, Singer's philosophy. So you know, you don't just get a narrative, right? You get a worldview. A thoughtful, thought-provoking worldview when you read his work. So anyway, that would be a good one. I would urge you to read that one, and you'll come out of it conflicted, you know. But that's the amazing thing about him, you know, that he can do that to you. He can, and you know, with both compassion and anger, you know, is aroused.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and we can turn a little bit to the story in a moment, yeah, for the little remaining time we have. So, but Gail, yes, another.
So now that you've mentioned that all of his translators were women,
yes.
I'm just curious, could you teach a course in Yiddish women writers, or is there?
Oh, for sure.
Well, I would find that interesting. And then who do they have translate them? Men? It's a joke. But I find it, since you are versed in Yiddish and could read a story in Yiddish, I found that very interesting that you could say that the comparison was pretty pure, because that's nice to hear. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
In terms of women writers, well, for example, the great woman novelist. Sorry, my I don't know what he's barking at. It must be a post. Lev. He's waiting for lunch, I think. Oh gosh, whose name just went out of my head. But great novels, The Tree of Life. So some of that was translated by a man, it's true, but then her daughter also translated a lot of her work. Some of the actually best translations I've seen of women's poetry was by a man, Barnett Zumhoff. It put out a beautiful volume of collected poetry by women. and he did a beautiful job, really. So, there's no, I don't think the gender thing matters, but yes, but I've taught it many times. I've given workshops on mostly Yiddish women poets, because that's what they were mostly known for. Not many, all were novelists, or even short story writers. It was mostly they excelled in poetry.
Thank you.
Yeah, and published in poetry. But let's talk. Yes, Mara.
Just one quick question. I didn't want to get us off track, but since you started to talk about women poets, you had recommended Katja Molodowski.
Yes.
She's just extraordinary. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you recommended Catherine Hellerstein's collection of her poetry.
For sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I don't always agree with her translations, and I've done it differently, but mostly really great. Yeah. So,
Thank you.
And she gives a lovely, that volume, she gives a beautiful introduction to Katja Molodowski and her work in that volume. So it's really worth looking at. Yeah.
Thank you.
So in terms of this story, especially, those of you who took the pains to read it. So, I mean, so remember, it's written, of course, this is a grown man wrote one, but it's written from the perspective of a young boy, right? Witnessing this panoply of characters, right? Coming through his father's court, right? Coming through there, and his impressions of them. And so what did you think of that? Did you feel that Singer was able to capture, to convince you that this was from the perspective of a child?
I don't know if he convinced me that it was a child, because it was because you didn't get a sense of sadness. You didn't get a sense of how the child felt, which I thought was odd, because he was so intellectual in his approach, or just observant, but you didn't feel a child's confusion.
It was the perspective of a man, I thought, not necessarily a child.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Well, at some point, when his mother. So those of you who didn't read the story, can someone just summarize it in a nutshell? Just what this was about? Anybody take a stab at just a few sentences to tell us what it was about?
You do it.
Okay. So this is Krochmalna Street, right, in Warsaw. This bustling Jewish quarter, part of the Jewish quarter in Warsaw, all of which, of course, was wiped out in the Holocaust. But this was before World War I. Yeah, before World War I. So this is a time when Peretz was in town. I mean, all of that. This was huge. Warsaw was a happening place in terms of Jewish culture and activities of all kinds, and humanity, right? People of all kinds having their life issues. So who comes to his father's court? But there's this elderly couple that not only comes to the court, but is actually living down the hall from the family. And so the little boy knows them, has seen them, and has seen that they are always acting like they're in love. Yeah, they have grown-up children, but they walk arm in arm. They talk about each other. So they're known in the neighborhood as being the elderly couple in love, which is kind of strange, and so the whole neighborhood, including the boy, is shocked when one day the word gets out that they want a divorce, right? They're getting divorced. How could this be? So why do they want a divorce? Anybody tell us why is this divorce happening? Remember?
So that he can remarry and continue to produce children is one
Right.
reason.
Yeah, the wife, and what is it called? It's called sacrifice, right? The wife loves him so much that she believes she knows what he needs best, which is a young woman to warm his bed and maybe give him more children, and that she needs to step aside and let him go on with his life, that he's got enough life in him yet to warrant that. And so she's willing to step aside and let him do that. He doesn't want, he's not interested at all, but he's, he goes along with her. And indeed, they're granted the divorce, but under Jewish law, because they both have consented to it. Wherever he especially he has consented to it, and so they granted the divorce. And she's chosen the young woman for him, right? And even supplied her with funds for her in quote trousseau, and start her life, and and she just steps aside. But of course, we know at the end, I mean, it's not like there's a huge climax here, right? But we know that neither of the older people live very long after that. It's a very short-lived bit of happiness, if he had any, and that's kind of the end of it. So what do we have here that makes it interesting? Why is this interesting? Was it interesting, I should say, and if so, why? Mara, yeah.
I found how he used Jewish law as the structure of the story fascinating. Whether it's sacrifice or the footstool or the command to be fruitful and multiply. And that everything that the common townspeople believed was in opposition to that, so that he turned an act which the town would consider absurd or irreverent into something demanded by Jewish law.
Right, because the husband was saying yes, yeah, let's do it, yeah, that's true. Very, very good. And so there's this inherent contradiction there, right? Inherent contradiction, but also this woman's willingness, right, to throw away everything that she had for the well-being of her beloved, or what she thinks is the well-being of her beloved. I mean, this is an interesting theme. Of course, we even have it a little bit with Sarah and Hagar, right? We don't know how much Sarah was advocating that he take Hagar, right?
Right.
And there's an Israeli film on this theme, where this the infertile woman, although much beloved by her husband, decides that what he needs is a young wife and a child, and she talks him into it, and she identifies the young woman, and brings her along. But it takes place in Israel in the late 19th century, and somehow among the Sephardic you can have two wives. You could still have two wives in those days. Not so kosher among the Ashkenaz, but among the Sephardic, you could do it. And so she has to be there while he's got his first wife and his second wife, this young, nubile young woman. And he keeps protesting. And of course, in the end, how can he resist, right? And then she winds up being kind of left in the dust, taking care of the baby that ensues. But so it's kind of a heart-wrenching theme. But Singer has taken this, right? What you see also is the mother's anger, right? People are angry at the husband for allowing this, right? For wanting this. And then the little boy becomes the object of disdain, like for all mankind, all men, that his mother feels. I thought that was actually funny, a very funny take in the story, right? That he this little kid is probably not even an adolescent yet, right? Represents all of the men in the world, and how unfair things are for women. So yes, so a lot of what he does, Singer, is bring out the Jewish life as it is interwoven with the law, right? And Jewish law and the study of the scriptures, and then also the mystical side of it as well. That's a huge part of him, of who he is. You don't see it so much in Shalom Aleichem, for example, except for references, but like in Tevya, there are references that are mangled, to the Torah. Peretz more so, much more so, but Singer in spades. And even in Enemies, where he's the main character is so far removed from his original scholarly Jewish life before the war. He's abandoned all of that. He still can't completely abandon it. It's still built into him, and it comes out in the story as well. Yeah. Anyway, and then there's a whole business of a get, which is a whole huge wrinkle in Jewish law, right? Divorce, so unfair to women, so very unfair over the centuries. Any last thoughts before I have to let you go?
I want to know why he didn't like Yentl.
Because it wasn't true to his story. He felt it was a distortion. It was kind of a Hollywoodish distortion. Yeah.
Okay.
That was the main reason. And I don't think he got along with Barbara. He came across as a very charming, funny guy, but he told me not to become a writer. When I was introduced to him, and when I was, I think, still in university, by a family friend, and who said that I wanted to be a writer, which I was toying with it, the idea. And he said, "Don't be a writer. It's a terrible life. It's a terrible." So that was very, very clear about that. And I think he did. I think he this was before he won the prize. He was already an established writer, but it was still a sweat to get those articles, books out every week. Yeah. So, and of course, to ignoring everything around him too. So, interesting character. So next week we come to the last so-called giant, which it's Avram Sutzkever. Please do, if you have a chance, look at the link to the work that I sent, which is some poems translated into English, of course. He was considered the greatest Jewish poet of the 20th century. So he's worth knowing about. Avram Sutzkever, also worth knowing about. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to discussing some of that with you. I hope you don't feel uncomfortable with poetry, because that's what we'll go into. Okay, that's what he's most known for. I mean, he wrote prose as well, but he's most known for this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.